I was in school to study psychology for a decade of my life, and yet just a few months after graduating with a doctorate in clinical psychology, just a few months away from getting licensed as a psychologist, I decided to give it all up. I've been putting off this video for a really long time because I wasn't yet ready to talk about it, and I've gotten a lot of questions about my reasons for this shift since I announced it about a year ago. But honestly, I was scared to get into it because there were people in my personal life who didn't take the news very well. And I worried that the internet would be just as unkind about it, if not more so. But now I finally feel ready to talk about it. I finally feel confident enough with my choice to speak about it. So let's get into it. So I'm going to break this video down into a few different sections that are kind of like categories of reasons why I decided to quit being a therapist. The first one is my lifelong dream of being an author. The second is ways in which the legal and ethical rules for psychologists clashed with my own personal values, and just personal things about who I am as a person that made it difficult for me to be a therapist. So right off the bat, I need to say that the main driving force behind me walking away from therapy was the fact that I was walking towards my lifelong dream of being an author. Whenever I've told childhood friends about my career change, none of them were ever surprised. They knew that from a very young age, I wanted to be an author. I was always writing. I was always told that I had a talent for it. It was always my dream. It was always what I was going to do. And I genuinely believe that if I didn't have this very strong pull towards writing, I would surely still be a therapist today, because being in therapy was a good enough second for me, and I was good enough at it. But when you have something that you're incredibly passionate about, good enough just doesn't cut it anymore. It's interesting, change is both gradual and sudden at the same time. And in the months after graduating from my doctorate program, when I was trying to set up my own private practice, I kept taking, 2 steps forward and 1 step backward on my journey of realizing it wasn't what I wanted to do. Every time I would get a potential client call, I would just be filled with dread. Every time I had a session the next day, I couldn't sleep because I was anxious. My body was telling me in the loudest terms possible, this is not for you. And then when I had weeks on end of just uninterrupted writing because I was still getting my private practice set up, I was suddenly so physiologically soothed and at peace. But there was a specific moment where I remember it really dawned on me that this is not what I want to do. I was actually studying for the licensure exam, the EPPP, and I had gotten to the section on career counseling, where it was talking about different career assessments for helping people, decide what they want to do for their vocations. And I decided to take a bunch of these career assessments just to get familiarized with them. And every single one said that the best career for me is something creative and independent, such as being an author. And I remember I walked over across the living room to the place where my mental health journal was, and I just started journaling everything that was on my heart. So this was the journal entry from November 19th, 2023. Writing has always been my chosen career. No matter what else I choose, I could never stop writing. It's like an itch that I can't stop. I can't resist my own nature. I can postpone my destiny, but I cannot change who I am. In grad school, I stayed with this career choice because I'm not a quitter, and because it didn't feel like my choice. I dragged my feet the whole time. But I've known for a long time that this is not the career for me. And the second it became my choice to stop or continue, it all locked into place. I don't want to continue without anyone external forcing me. I simply have no intrinsic motivation to go on. I never had a good answer when people asked me why I went into clinical psychology, because I wasn't truly passionate about it. This was just something I thought was interesting. I can't live without writing. And I can explain very easily why I want to be a writer, because I cannot stop seeing the beauty in the world and alchemizing it into words so that others will see it through my eyes too. Beauty is the reason I live. Writing is the reason I live. And even when I was forced to explain why I went into psychology, I always ended up talking about writing, about the overlaps between therapy and writing. I tried to find the second closest thing, but I will never be able to stop writing. So after I wrote that, I remember going up to my husband and telling him, my epiphany. And he said, yeah, I feel like you have this epiphany every week though. Is anything going to change? And up until that point, like I said, I'd been taking 2 steps forward, 1 step backward. I was in what in the field of psychology we call the contemplation stage of change. But when I sat down to write that journal entry, everything clicked for me. I felt like I could finally see the truth for what it was, and there was no going back from that. So I decided to cancel my licensure application, and with nothing holding us back in Seattle anymore, my husband and I decided to initiate other lifelong dreams of ours, like moving back to Europe. On that note, before I go into all the other factors that led to me quitting my career as a therapist, I cannot tell you how excited I am that as of today, my second fiction novel, A Song at Dead Man's Cove, is finally out. This is a gothic horror novel that takes place in coastal Washington. It's a dual POV, one set in modern times, one set in the Victorian era, so it is partly historical fiction as well. And this is the book blurb. It follows 2 protagonists, a modern-day misanthrope and a woman in the Victorian era who thinks stealing love is going to make her whole. 2023. Another person has disappeared at Dead Man's Cove in coastal Washington. Jaded from her job at the historic Irving Hotel, Zarya wanders to the scene of the tragedy. She's heard her Russian mother's tales of rusalki, vengeful spirits that have died unclean deaths near a body of water, and never paid them much attention. But now, on a misty headland beside an abandoned lighthouse, Zarya locks eyes with the rusalka and is chosen to be the next victim. She must unearth the siren's tragedy before Rusalka Week, a period in early summer when the water spirits roam freely on land. 1850. Josephine has just joined her newlywed husband in Washington, in the lighthouse erected by local businessman Hurley Irving. Marriage is not quite what she expected, and her melancholia grows over the course of the winter. The medic prescribes pregnancy as the antidote. What he doesn't realize is how far Josephine is willing to go in order to become a mother. So I've put a link to order the novel in a pinned comment as well as in the description box. I'm really looking forward to hearing all of your thoughts on the novel, and I really hope you enjoy it. If you're a fan of historical, atmospheric, folklore-filled gothic fiction, this is definitely the book for you. And please, 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 once you're done reading it, I'd really appreciate a review on Goodreads and or Amazon. So let's go back to why I left a career in therapy and talk about the ways in which the legal and ethical rules for psychologists clashed with my own personal values. One thing that I simply could not wrap my head around is the liability risk for therapists. And specifically, I think it is absolutely incoherent that therapists can get sued if their clients decide to end their lives. Because I don't believe anyone has the power nor even the right to control another person's actions. Now, of course, if a therapist is negligent somehow, they should be sued for negligence because it was their responsibility to help their client receive quality psychological treatment. But the idea that you could have done everything within your power as a therapist and still lost a client, and then possibly have their family come after you legally, it does not feel right to me that that's possible. And I also find that this legal pressure, this looming threat, paradoxically makes people worse therapists. Because of the liability, the moment someone discloses the slightest level of risk, therapists need to conduct an in-depth risk assessment that completely derails the therapy session. The focus then becomes on how the therapist will be able to protect themselves in court rather than how to actually help the client or what is actually behind the client's ideation. I really wish we lived in a world where the laws acknowledged you cannot control what another person chooses to do, so the therapist could focus on helping the client rather than needing to negotiate with the client and, make them sign a contract promising that they're not going to hurt themselves. It's a disproportionate level of responsibility because I fundamentally do not believe that we are responsible for the behavior of other people. I cannot control what someone else chooses to do, and I don't understand why I have to pretend I do. Another incongruence between the law and my own personal values was regarding abandonment laws. If you're not familiar, these are laws that basically say if you as a therapist decide to suddenly end a relationship with a client and you do it in the wrong way, you can be sued for abandonment. And again, I get there are reasons for this. Obviously, therapy clients can be quite vulnerable and therapists have a responsibility to make sure that they're okay. But I fundamentally disagree with the notion that anyone should ever be legally prevented from exiting a relationship. That is a basic human right, and it made me feel very claustrophobic and anxious to work in a field where that basic human right was not respected just because I was a therapist. If a client becomes violent or just threatening or just unkind, you as a therapist do not have free rein to end that relationship. You technically can end the relationship as long as it's in the client's best interest too, and or you provide them with referrals. But abandonment laws don't sit right with me. Nothing should ever prevent a human being from leaving a relationship regardless what their job is. Another incongruence was between my personal values and the ethical rules around self-disclosure and neutrality. There's this notion within the field of therapy that therapists need to be neutral so that the clients can project onto them and then the therapist and client can work through these relational issues via those projections. And more modern therapy modalities acknowledge that a neutral therapist does not exist. Client projections will always somewhat depend on personal attributes the therapist holds. Like if a therapist looks around middle-aged, they might project issues that they have from their mom onto their therapist. But self-disclosure is still very much frowned upon for this reason, because therapists are not allowed to disclose much about themselves to therapy clients. And within the context of therapy, I have no issue with this. I've never felt the urge to self-disclose something in therapy that wasn't with the very purposeful intention of helping the client, because I was never in therapy helping therapy clients for myself. But outside of therapy, I'm a very open person, and like on this channel, I like to illustrate my points with personal examples. I like to share about my own personal struggles in case it helps people. I value showing up with openness and authenticity. And unfortunately, there was a clash between that and therapy. There are things I've said on this YouTube channel, particularly after I decided to close my practice, that I would never in a million years have said to a therapy client. And the idea that a therapy client would find my YouTube channel and hear me say those things in a different context, it feels discordant, it feels uncomfortable, and I realized I can't have my cake and eat it too. If I want to be very open on my social media page, then I probably shouldn't be working with clients. And also, I do disagree with the way that political ideology has deeply embedded itself within therapy frameworks. Anytime you have a very large amount of political homogeneity within a scientific field, that's dangerous. Scientists are supposed to have diversity of thought so that they can challenge each other's theories and therefore get closer and closer at the truth. Unfortunately, both the science and therapeutic modalities in psychology have become very politically homogenous, with little diversity of thought. And I see how much of an echo chamber the field of therapy has become on these therapist communities that I'm still a part of. For example, I remember there was one post I saw where someone said, "Many of the common threads I see on this and other pages designed for us therapists to feel community support leave me feeling brokenhearted and hopeless. I wish this profession was full of people who respect each other and speak compassionately." Do you want to guess what the top comment was under that post? "We are not required to speak compassionately with those who wish to take away one's fundamental human rights." What? When did the person posting that say anything about stripping away someone's fundamental human rights? There was nothing political in anything that they said. But this commenter's response really speaks to how radical and reactive many therapists have become, that everything comes back to their political worldview, and shitty behavior gets excused under the guise of social justice. The deeper the echo chamber becomes in this field, the harder it will be to provide quality therapy to clients, because therapists will be much more preoccupied with confirming their own worldview than with getting at the heart of the matter. And in a lot of these therapist communities, a lot of people feel that it's okay, for instance, to discriminate against clients who have certain political affiliations and use social justice as a way to justify that. That does not sit right with me, and I'm very glad that it is not my problem anymore. It is not my circus, not my monkey. And then lastly, let's talk about just some personal things about who I am as a person that made it difficult for me to be a therapist. Being a therapist was not the best fit for my personality's strengths and weaknesses. That's actually one of the things I wrote in that journal entry that day. Being a therapist or psychologist was never compatible with my strengths or weaknesses. I was always trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. I can try to mold myself into the shape I need to be, but I will always be in pain and uncomfortable. I don't want to live that way. So what exactly am I talking about here? I would get a ton of brain fog. Honestly, I think I was in fight or flight for the entire duration of every single therapy session that I was in, because I was constantly stressed about whether I was doing enough to be a good therapist, whether I was saying the right things, whether I was being helpful, whether clients liked me. And I did try to work on it for many, many years. Remember, I was in grad school for 5 years. 4 of those were spent trying to be a therapist, but it never went away. If anything, it got worse with time. I remember in between clients, I would try to stretch my legs and try to do all these like vagal nerve exercises to soothe my nervous system because I was so incredibly foggy and in fight or flight. And sure, I could have worked on it further, and I probably would have made progress with my imposter syndrome as the years went on. But I realized I don't want to change myself. I don't want to tire myself trying to change when there is a career out there that already works seamlessly with my strengths and weaknesses. I would rather just accept myself as I am and find that career that's a much better fit for me. Another personal issue is that my YouTube channel would have become a liability for me. I used to get a lot of therapy requests from people who had resonated with my YouTube videos, and most of them were people I couldn't even take on as clients due to jurisdiction rules, like I was only able to practice within a specific context. But there was also a safety element that really concerned me. The idea that someone could initiate a therapeutic relationship with me after having developed a parasocial relationship with me in their heads was very, very scary. And I take my privacy very seriously. I go to great lengths to not engage with people who are being pushy or creepy on the internet to make sure that they don't have access to my psychic energy. But being a therapist would have given people an avenue to break down those barriers. And that was pretty fucking terrifying to consider. It's interesting, a lot of my peers, people from my cohort, are now trying to build a social media following in order to build up their caseloads to get more referrals. Ironically, if they were to actually make it big enough on social media that they would get referrals from it, those are not referrals they would want to be taking. So I think this idea that therapists should use social media to build their caseloads is erroneous because it can actually cause a lot more problems rather than help you in your career. Now, some of the people in my life have expressed this attitude of oh no, you had to give up being a therapist because you had a YouTube channel, that really sucks. I don't see it that way at all. This YouTube channel is what allows me to live anywhere in the world, to pursue my lifelong dream of being an author, to have an audience for my books, to be creative on this channel. It is a so much better fit for me than being a therapist. I don't for a second regret starting this YouTube channel. If anything, it was the smartest thing I've ever done in my life. But I do think that maybe it's beneficial for there to be some sort of segregation between psychology educators on the internet and therapists, if only just for the therapist's safety. Something else that might sound small, but was pretty big for me was, as a therapist, I was constantly judged for looking too young, to the point where it became a real complex for me. And it was something that I became hypervigilant about in every single session. When starting off with someone new, I would kind of see how sometimes their face would just drop when they saw how young I looked and how disappointed they were. And I know that this would have gotten better with age, but honestly, I know the way that the women in my family age, and I know that I would have continued to look very young for a long time. My mom, for instance, up until very recently used to tell patients that I was in college or that I was in grad school, whatever my life phase was at that point in time, so that they would realize, oh, she's actually much older than she looks. And I really hate that. I really hate that looking young became such a deep complex for me because of being a therapist all those years. But unfortunately, I had very many encounters with people who expressed doubts about my ability to help them because of the way that I looked that I ultimately couldn't change. And lastly, another thing that made it difficult to be a therapist. A lot of clients these days, particularly younger clients, want a solution in therapy to psychic pain that has no solution. And they tend to expect the therapist to do the work for them. And the type of work that I was most interested in doing, depth-oriented therapy, was not compatible with that. And that also made therapy not the most enjoyable at times. Now, after I decided to no longer be a therapist, I, like I said, didn't get amazing reactions from everyone in my life. I was told that I was being impulsive. I was told to just stick with it because, you'll learn to love it in time. I was told that I was, wasting a decade of my life and all the money that had been spent on my education. I was told that no one on YouTube would take me seriously anymore if I wasn't working clinically. I was told that I would run out of video topics for this channel and that what I had to say just wouldn't matter anymore if I wasn't a therapist. And all that kind of got under my head for a long time. And that's why I didn't want to talk about it, because I didn't want those people to come out of the woodwork and say those things while I was feeling very vulnerable. But you know what? Now I get to live my dream life. Now I get to be in Europe, starting a family, writing books, making my own schedule, having a lot of flexibility in my day-to-day life, not answering to anyone but myself, not having that huge liability on my back. Even if all of those things had been true, it'd be worth it. So I guess the moral of the story is don't listen to when people try to tell you that the path you've chosen for yourself, that you know with every fiber in your body is right for you, is not right for you. Don't listen, because those people are not the ones who are going to need to live with the consequences of your decisions. That's only you. And when I look back on that time in my life, I remember I was so stressed out that I would literally dissociate even after hours for no reason, because I was in a state of fight or flight, like I said, so much of the day. I'm pretty sure I constantly had high blood pressure while I was with clients. These things add up over time that would have amounted to probably significant health issues. And a lot of that anxiety completely dissolved the moment I graduated from my doctorate program and the moment I decided to shut down my practice. I cannot imagine, if I had decided to stay in that life, the incredibly harmful effects that it would have taken on my body over time. I'm really curious to see what you guys think about the things I brought up in this video. I think this topic brings up a lot about, the idea of shifting careers and following your true passion, but also some of the pitfalls of the field of therapy as a whole. So yeah, hopefully I should be pretty rich discussion in the comment section. I hope you have a nice rest of your week, and I'll see you soon. Tell me what you mean, tell me.